Amarangeli was only 23, but her days already felt twice as long as her years. After working back-to-back shifts at the Baobab Crown, the grand hotel that looked out over Lumina Bay, she dragged herself into the Sky Suite to finish one last task. She pulled at the heavy sheets, tucked the corners with tired hands, and leaned into the pillows just to straighten them. The mattress was so soft it felt like a cloud, and before she realized, her eyes slipped shut. Outside, rain slapped against the tall glass windows, the storm drowning her small sigh of relief. Hours later, the suite's owner walked in. Dallin Ibekwe, once a dock runner and now a billionaire investor, stepped through the door with his entourage. At his side was Naledi Moyo, a live-stream star with millions of followers. The door had barely closed when their eyes fell on the scene, the maid asleep on his bed. Gasps filled the room. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked on. Naledi's stream caught the moment like a spark, and within seconds, it was everywhere, Maid in the billionaire's bed. Amara woke in panic, her heart hammering as voices swarmed around her. Security rushed in. Managers barked orders. The lights of dozens of phones burned against her face. She tried to speak, to explain the double shifts, the exhaustion, the mistake. But the storm outside wasn't as loud as the storm that had just begun online. Her small slip of sleep had turned into a scandal the whole city would soon be watching. Security stormed into the suite within seconds, their black uniforms sharp against the pale walls. Manager Sefu Tandale marched in right behind them, his voice rising above the thunder outside. He barked orders at everyone, at the guards, at the staff, even at Amara, who was still shaking awake and trying to understand what had just happened. Phones were everywhere now, glowing like tiny spotlights, and before Amara could even open her mouth to explain, Naledi Moyo's quick 10-second clip had already gone live. Millions of eyes were watching, and the story had been written without her, the maid in the billionaire's bed. By midnight, the whole city knew her name. #Baobab scandal blazed across Ndari's timelines, spreading like fire through dry grass. Some people mocked her, others pitied her, and many argued endlessly in the comments. Was she bold? Was she careless? Was she a thief? People she had never met were already judging her life. Amara clutched at the one thing that kept her steady, her old notebook, tucked into her apron pocket. The pages were worn, filled with numbers and small calculations. Every coin she saved went into that book, every sacrifice tracked for her sister's medical bills back in Kenyela. She whispered, almost to herself, that she had not stolen anything. Dallin Ibekwe, the man whose bed she had collapsed into, stood a few steps away. His face was calm, almost unreadable. While everyone else rushed to shout, record, or condemn, he looked at her more closely. He noticed the small details no one else cared about, the sleeve of her uniform stitched by hand, the raw skin on her palms from endless scrubbing, the way her voice shook not from guilt but from exhaustion. He saw her for what she was, not a criminal, not a scandal, just a young woman who had worked herself to the edge. Sefu, however, was furious. His forehead glistened with sweat as he pressed for immediate action. "We must fire her right now," he snapped. "Our brand is bleeding." His words cut the air, harsh and cold, as though the girl in front of him was nothing more than a stain on the hotel's reputation. The staff glanced at each other nervously, knowing that when Sefu was angry, no one argued back. But Dallin did not raise his voice. He turned away from the noise and walked toward the glass wall, where the storm had cleared and Lumina Bay glittered under scattered city lights. He spoke slowly, with the kind of weight that silences a room. "Or maybe our conscience is." The words hung there, heavier than the rain outside. For the first time that night, Amara felt someone was not looking at her like a mistake, but like a person. She tightened her grip on the notebook, holding it close to her chest, and blinked back, the tears pressing at her eyes. The scandal was still raging online, but in that quiet suite, with the city shining below, a different story was beginning. The rain kept pounding against the hotel windows, the storm outside echoing the storm that had already taken over Amara's life. In the quiet staff lounge, away from the cameras and the noise, she finally found her voice. Her hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, her fingers trembling as she spoke. She began to tell her story, not like a defense, but like a truth she had carried alone for too long. She spoke of waking before dawn in Kenyela Township, catching 2 buses just to reach the hotel in time for her morning shift. She explained how she once enrolled in night classes for hospitality but had to pause them when money ran thin. Her dream was simple but strong, to one day open a small guesthouse of her own, a place where guests would feel warmth the moment they walked in, the kind of warmth she had always tried to give here. She laughed softly as she admitted she had learned most of her skills from YouTube videos and borrowed hotel manuals. She would spend nights folding towel swans and hearts until her fingers cramped, determined to make her work shine even if no one noticed. Every crease and fold was practice for the future she imagined. To her, every bed she made was a rehearsal for the guesthouse she promised her mother she would build. Across from her, Dallin Ibequi listened in silence. The billionaire who commanded shipping routes and tech firms was suddenly not thinking of his empire, but of his own past. He remembered his first job as a dock runner at Ikuta Harbor, where men shouted his name only when they needed boxes carried, and where he often felt invisible. He remembered the hunger in his stomach and the hunger in his heart, the same hunger he now saw in Amara's eyes. When she spoke of her exhaustion, of how she worked until her body betrayed her on that bed, Dallin leaned forward. His voice was low but steady. "You fell asleep because you were working like two people," he said. His words landed like a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "That's not a crime. That's a management failure, not a moral one." Amara blinked at him, unsure if she had heard right. No one had ever spoken of her exhaustion as anything but weakness. For the first time that night, she felt the weight in her chest lighten, just a little. Dallin's gaze held hers, and in that moment, she understood he wasn't only seeing the scandal, he was seeing her, the long commutes, the tired hands, the dreams folded into swan-shaped towels. The storm outside thundered on, but in that small lounge, something else had begun, the first hint that her story might not end in shame, but in a chance at something greater. By 2 a.m, the internet had turned wild. What started as a short clip of a tired maid had grown into a storm too big to control. Social feeds were filled with people shouting over each other. Some posted conspiracy theories, claiming Amara had planned the whole thing to trap a billionaire. Others turned it into a debate about class, about rich men and poor workers, about how one mistake can cost someone everything. Then came the poll that spread faster than anything else: fire her or forgive her. Thousands voted in minutes, their thumbs deciding a stranger's future. Inside the hotel, Sephu Tandale, the manager, was fuming. His jaw was tight as he typed out a termination letter. In his eyes, Amara was no longer an employee but a stain on the hotel's polished brand. To him, firing her was the only way to stop the bleeding. In another corner, Naledi Moyo, the live-stream star who had started it all, was teasing her millions of followers with the promise of a part 2. She dangled it like bait, building suspense for her audience while Amara's life hung in the balance. But Dallin Ibequi was not rushing. While others shouted about damage control, he stayed calm. He leaned back, thought carefully, and finally spoke. His idea stunned the room. Instead of hiding the scandal, he wanted to flip it. At sunrise, he said, the board and partners would gather in the very same sky suite. Amara would not be fired or shamed. Instead, she would lead. She would run the service like a junior floor manager, guiding the experience with timing, poise, and true hospitality. The room went quiet. Sephu nearly dropped the letter in his hand. "This is madness," he muttered. But Dallin's voice cut through the doubt. If Amara could hold the room, if she could show grace under the brightest spotlight, he would personally fund her hotel management diploma. Not only that, she would also earn a place in the Ibequi Fellows program, a pathway reserved for future leaders. He turned back toward the stormlit windows and said words that would soon travel far beyond the hotel walls. "Turn the bed into a stage. Let merit go viral." It was a gamble, but Dallin knew the world was already watching. If they wanted a spectacle, he would give them one, but on his terms. Not a story of shame, but of second chances. Not a scandal, but a test of skill. In that moment, Amara's mistake began to transform into an opportunity. And while the online world raged with hashtags and arguments, a different story was quietly taking shape inside the Baobab crown, waiting for the first light of dawn to bring it to life. Between 3 and 6 in the morning, the hotel that had felt like a battlefield only hours before slowly turned into a training ground. Amara did not stand alone. The staff, who had watched her humiliation unfold in whispers and phone screens, decided to rally behind her. In the kitchen, Mama Rui, the veteran sous chef with silver streaks in her hair and fire in her eyes, set aside her knives and took Amara under her wing. She drilled her with a tray of delicate sunrise canapés, explaining how every bite had to feel light yet memorable. Then came the baobab ginger tea service, a tradition rooted in Ndari hospitality. Not too strong, not too weak, Mama Rui said, guiding Amara's hands as she poured. The guest must taste warmth before they taste spice. While the kitchen buzzed, Jalea, the sharp-eyed housekeeping lead, pulled out a clipboard. She mapped every detail into a minute-by-minute plan. Lights dimmed, then brightened. Cushions were adjusted by angle and symmetry. Scent diffusers were tested and tested again until the air carried only the faintest hint of citrus. A guest should feel comfort before they even know why, Jalea told her. At one point, the power flickered, and the espresso machine gave a low groan before shutting off completely. Panic almost broke through, but Amara caught her breath and found another path. She reached for a polished copper French press, heating the water by hand and warming each cup before pouring. The staff exchanged glances of approval. This was not luck, it was adaptability, the mark of someone who belonged in service leadership. In between tasks, Amara stole small moments to prepare herself. She stitched the torn sleeve of her uniform with quick, careful hands. She practiced introducing Dallin's guests by name, whispering them until they flowed easily from her tongue. And over again, she repeated one simple line, "Welcome to Lumina Bay, where care is our signature." The words started shaky but grew stronger with each attempt, until they carried weight and warmth. Time slipped away quickly. The storm outside softened, and the city began to stir. From the tall windows, the first strands of light stretched across Ndari's skyline, painting the bay with silver and gold. Amara stood by the suite's door, the tray steady in her hands, the French press gleaming on the table, her uniform patched but spotless. Her heart was racing, but her hands no longer shook. She had spent the night turning fear into preparation, shame into discipline. Now she was ready. The girl who had once dozed off in exhaustion was gone. In her place stood a young woman who, with the help of her team, had turned the scandal into a chance to prove herself. And as dawn broke over Lumina Bay, Amara was no longer just a room attendant. She was about to step into her own spotlight. At exactly 7:10 a.m., the soft chime of the elevator echoed through the sky suite. The air shifted instantly, thick with anticipation. One by one, Dallin's directors filed in, faces sharp, eyes alert, carrying the weight of logistics, fintech, ports, and media empires on their shoulders. They had come expecting a scandal cleanup, but instead found a young room attendant standing tall, waiting to greet them. Amara did not stumble. She moved with quiet grace, each action practiced until it felt like instinct. She held the door open just long enough to show respect but not servitude. She made eye contact with each guest, her gaze steady, warm, and unshaken. Names flowed off her tongue with ease, each one remembered perfectly. A jacket slipped from a director's arm, and before it even touched the ground, Amara had whisked it onto the valet rack. Another director's heel caught on the carpet, and with one subtle gesture, Amara bent and smoothed it, restoring dignity without a single word. When she served the tea, her smile was not forced or nervous. It was gentle, genuine, and it reached her eyes, softening the tension in the room. The directors, used to boardrooms and battles of numbers, found themselves disarmed by something far simpler, real care. Then the moment cracked. Naledi Moyo burst into the suite like a spark thrown on dry wood, her live camera already running, her voice carrying for both the room and the millions watching online. "Tell us, Amara," she said with a sly grin, "did the billionaire give his maid a promotion for sleeping in his bed?" The jab cut sharp, designed to humiliate, but Amara did not flinch. She turned toward the lens, her chin lifting ever so slightly. Her voice was calm, clear, and stronger than it had ever been. "I made a mistake," she said, each word deliberate. "I was exhausted from a system that runs people ragged. But today I'm here to prove what happens when someone believes in you." For a heartbeat, silence held the room. Then the live stream chat exploded. Hearts poured across the screen in floods. Comments spun faster than eyes could follow, cheers, tears, praise, hope. The narrative had shifted. Amara was no longer the maid caught in the wrong bed, she was the girl standing up for workers everywhere, the face of resilience, the proof that mistakes do not erase worth. Even the directors, people who built fortunes on precision and risk, leaned forward as if to see her more clearly. In her composure, in her refusal to bow to shame, they saw something rare. Not just hospitality. Not just poise. Leadership. As the golden light of the morning spilled across Lumina Bay and into the suite, Amara stood centered in it, no longer hidden in shadows. The storm that had nearly drowned her was turning into a tide that could lift her higher than she had ever dreamed. Sefu's face burned red as Naledi's live stream gained traction, hearts flying across the screen by the thousands. He lunged forward, his hand outstretched to snatch the phone and shut down the broadcast before more damage could spread. But Amara moved faster, not with panic but with surprising calm. She pulled her own small phone from her apron and laid it on the glass table in front of everyone. With one tap, a voice filled the room. It was Sefu's. The recording played clear and sharp, his words unmistakable. Sign this blank confession. Say you acted alone. It will protect the brand. The air froze. The directors stiffened in their seats, their eyes snapping toward the manager. Gasps rippled through the room like waves hitting the shore. The same man who had barked about loyalty and reputation only hours earlier was exposed as someone willing to sacrifice an exhausted worker to save himself. Dallin's jaw tightened, his usual calm now edged with steel. He turned slowly toward Sefu, his voice low but firm. Mr. Tandale, hand in your badge. The silence after those words was heavier than thunder. Sefu's shoulders sagged, the fight drained out of him as he fumbled with his badge and placed it on the table. He knew it was over. The board members, who had entered with skeptical eyes, now murmured in approval. They had just witnessed a young woman hold her ground with grace and expose corruption in one breath. Amara stood there steady, the storm outside nothing compared to the storm she had just weathered inside. Dallin shifted his gaze back to her, and his tone softened. You've just managed crisis, service, and messaging in one breath, he said, almost with pride. Then, before the entire board, he laid out what would change her life. He offered to fund her hotel management diploma in full. He promised her a salaried trainee manager role at the Baobab Crown. And beyond that, he announced she would lead a pilot program across his hospitality group, redesigning staff schedules, building in rest breaks, and improving meals and nutrition for every worker under his portfolio. Run it, he told her. Make sure no one else breaks the way you nearly did. Amara's lips parted, but for a moment no words came. She had walked into this night as a maid fighting sleep, holding onto an old notebook filled with numbers and sacrifices. Now she was being handed the keys to education, leadership, and change. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with a swelling she had never felt before, the weight of possibility. Around her, phones buzzed with breaking alerts, live stream chats overflowed, and the world outside Lumina Bay was still deciding what story to tell. But inside that suite, with the morning light spilling across the floor, Amara already knew. Her story had shifted forever. By 9 in the morning, Amara's world had turned upside down. Only hours earlier she had been fighting to keep her job, her dignity slipping away under flashing cameras. Now the hotel itself bowed its head. The Baobab Crown issued a public apology, admitting its failures and promising change. They announced that benefits for night staff, which had quietly been cut months ago, would be reinstated immediately. Across Kavunda, the internet buzzed with a new story. The hashtag from bed to board took off, filled with clips of Amara's calm presence, her smile as she served tea, her steady voice as she faced millions watching online. People were no longer replaying her stumble, they were celebrating her rise. The changes came fast and real. A housing grant was awarded to her family, lifting them out of their leaking roof in Kenyela and into a bright apartment in Ndari's Makora district, where sunlight filled every room. While her mother wept with joy, Amara's phone chimed again. An email had arrived, her acceptance letter to the Ndari Institute of Hospitality. For a moment she could only stare at the words, hardly believing. Then she typed a simple message to her mother, "We did it." Naledi Moyo, seeing the shift in public mood, requested an exclusive interview. Amara agreed, but on her own terms. She insisted they film it not in the Sky Suite or some polished boardroom, but in the staff cafeteria, surrounded by the very people who had trained, supported, and lifted her through the night. These are the ones who keep palaces shining, she said. When the clip aired, the feed overflowed with hearts. Outside, Lumina Bay sparkled under the morning sun, but for Amara, the light was no longer just in the water. It was in her future.